A stranger grabbed my arm that evening and said, "Your husband made a huge mistake." But the truth she revealed about who he really was, forced me to question everything I believed about love, loyalty, and the life I thought was mine. Sometimes the most earth-shattering truths don't come from the people we trust, but from someone we've never met. Sometimes the person we sleep beside hides the deepest shadows, and sometimes the warning we ignore becomes the very thing that saves us. On that day, in that crowded place, when a stranger stopped me with trembling eyes, I felt the first crack in the foundation of a story I thought I understood. And what followed wasn't just betrayal. It was revelation, a painful unraveling that forced me to rebuild myself piece by piece. Today, I want to share that journey with you, not to reopen wounds, but to remind you that every truth, no matter how devastating, can become the beginning of your strength. I remember the exact moment that stranger stepped into my path because it felt like the air itself shifted around me. I was not prepared for anything unusual that day. I thought it was just another routine walk, another simple errand, another quiet piece of life that required no heavy thinking and no emotional weight. Yet life has a way of dropping truth on you at the very moment you least expect it. I was standing there with my bag in my hand thinking about nothing important when a woman with tired eyes and trembling fingers reached out to me. She said my name softly, like she was not sure if I would respond. And even though I did not recognize her, something about her presence, something about the way she looked at me with a mixture of fear and urgency made my heartbeat slow down, as if my body already knew this was not going to be an ordinary exchange. She stepped closer and her voice wavered. She told me she knew my husband. The sound of her words stretched through the air like a warning, uninvited yet unavoidable. She said he made a huge mistake. At first I thought she must be confused, because we all want to believe that the person we love, the person we trust, the person we share life with could never be the subject of a stranger's trembling confession. I wanted to dismiss her. I wanted to tell her she got the wrong person. I wanted to walk away and protect the little bubble of peace I believed I had. But something in her eyes held me still. They were filled with a kind of sadness that only comes from carrying truth for too long. She looked like someone who had replayed this moment over and over before finally gathering the courage to speak. I stood there in silence, trying to steady my breath, because even before she went further my intuition began to whisper. It was not a loud scream. It was a soft, gentle nudge, the kind that feels like fingers tapping lightly on your shoulder. The kind of whisper you can ignore if you want to. The kind that does not force its presence but invites you to listen. I felt it that day. A pull inside my chest telling me that this encounter was not random. This was not a coincidence. This was not a simple misunderstanding. This was the beginning of a truth that had been trying to reach me through little signs, little changes, little shifts that I had chosen not to see. She took a deep breath and I noticed how nervous she was. Her hands would not stop shaking and she glanced around as if she feared someone might see her talking to me. I felt a strange wave of empathy for her because she seemed to be struggling with the weight of what she was about to reveal. It was as though she had held this information for too long, and breaking her silence felt like breaking a part of herself. Yet she still pushed through because something inside her believed I deserved to know. And that alone made my heart ache. For a moment I wanted to run. I wanted to say that I did not need to hear anything. I wanted to protect my heart from whatever she was carrying. But my feet stayed planted because deep down a small part of me already knew that the ground beneath my life had begun to crack long before this moment. I had felt it in the quiet hours. I had felt it in the slight distant look that sometimes crossed my husband's face. I had felt it in the moments he avoided my eyes when answering a simple question. I had felt it in the excuses that had become more frequent yet less convincing. The truth had been knocking on my door and I had refused to open it. So life sent someone to open it for me. The stranger spoke slowly, as if choosing each word with pain and caution. She said she tried to stay silent for a long time. She said she told herself it was not her place. She said she convinced herself that silence was easier. But she could not bear it anymore because she believed that I deserved clarity, that I deserved honesty, that I deserved the chance to see the full picture. Her voice cracked when she told me that she never planned to cross paths with me like this. She never imagined she would be the one to deliver a truth that could change my world. Yet fate had brought her there and she felt a responsibility she could not ignore. As I listened I felt a strange mixture of dread and gratitude. Dread because I knew the next moment would alter the life I knew. Gratitude because despite the pain she carried in her eyes she still dared to speak. That alone takes courage. That alone takes heart. That alone takes a kind of strength that not many people possess. She looked at me with a softness that did not feel like pity. It felt like understanding, like she knew what it was like to discover something you never wanted to know. Like she knew the agony of having your reality shattered by someone you trusted. I stood there breathing slowly as the world around me seemed to blur. All the noise of the street felt distant. The people walking past us felt like shadows. The space between her words felt heavier than the words themselves. I wondered what kind of mistake she was talking about. I wondered how long she had known. I wondered how many others might have known. I wondered why my husband had been able to look at me every day with calm eyes while keeping something like this hidden. The thought alone made my throat tighten. Betrayal does not always begin with the truth itself. Sometimes it begins with suspicion. Sometimes it begins with a feeling. Sometimes it begins with a stranger showing up out of nowhere carrying a truth they never wished to hold. She paused for a moment as if giving me time to prepare. She told me that before she went on she needed to ask me if I was ready. The question hit me harder than the truth itself because no one is ever ready to hear something that can break them. No one is ever ready to have their sense of security ripped away. No one is ever ready to look at the person they love and wonder who they really are beneath the surface. Yet I nodded slowly because pretending ignorance no longer felt safe. Pretending everything was fine would not protect me. Pretending nothing was wrong would only delay the hurt waiting at my doorstep. She went on to tell me that she had hoped my husband would come forward himself. She had hoped he would take responsibility. She had hoped he would confess what he had done before the weight of it crushed someone else. But he never did, and that silence became too heavy for her to carry. She told me that she could not keep the truth buried because she believed lies have a way of growing and consuming the lives of everyone they touch. She said she did not want to watch another woman lose herself in the shadows of someone else's deception, and in that moment I realized her bravery was not meant to destroy me. It was meant to free me. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as she began sharing the details, the parts of the story I never imagined were possible. I felt each word hit my chest like a slow, steady drum. Every moment of her story aligned with every moment I had ignored. Things suddenly made sense in ways I wished they never did. It is a painful thing to realize that the truth fits perfectly with everything your heart already feared. It is painful to accept that someone you love might not be who you believed they were. But pain does not wait for permission. It simply arrives. As she continued, I felt an odd calm settle over me. Not peace. Not acceptance. Just clarity. A harsh, bright clarity that made me see how blind I had been, how many red flags I had dismissed, how much faith I had placed in a man who did not protect it. I felt anger rise inside me, not toward the stranger but toward the lies that had been living in my home, breathing in my space, feeding off my trust. It was a slow burning anger mixed with heartbreak and disbelief. Yet even in that moment I felt strength. A strength I did not know I had. A strength that began to form from the very first word she spoke to me. By the time she finished I realized that meeting her was not an accident. It was an intervention. It was a turning point. It was a moment the universe chose to open my eyes because I had kept them shut for too long. She looked at me with tears forming along her lashes and said she was sorry. Sorry for the pain. Sorry for the shock. Sorry for the truth. Yet I found myself whispering thank you. Because sometimes the truth hurts yet heals. Wounds yet wakes. Breaks yet builds. And though I stood there trembling from what I had just learned, I also felt something powerful stir within me. A sense that this moment was the beginning of my awakening. For so long I convinced myself that the small uneasy moments in my marriage were nothing more than everyday stress. I told myself that every missed call was an accident, that every late night was justified, that every vague explanation was simple ordinary life. I refused to believe that anything deeper or darker could be hiding behind those little cracks. And yet those cracks kept returning again and again, spreading like thin lines across glass. I noticed them. I felt them. But I chose not to question them because the truth frightened me more than the silence I used to cover it. I remember the way he would walk into the house with that distant look in his eyes. He would smile at me, but the smile never reached the corners of his face. It felt hollow, yet somehow I convinced myself that he was just tired. I would ask him how his day went and he would mumble something short, half-hearted and foggy. I told myself he just needed rest. I told myself life was draining him. I told myself that love meant giving space even when that space began to feel like a wall. There were nights when he would say he needed to work late. Nights when he would say he had to help a friend. Nights when he would step outside to take a call that he claimed was important or urgent or private. I would hear his voice through the window. Sometimes it sounded low and serious. Other times it sounded too soft, too gentle, too warm to be as innocent as he said. Yet every time my heart tried to tug at my sleeve whispering that something was wrong, I hushed it. I told myself to stop imagining things. I told myself not to be insecure. I told myself to breathe and trust him because trust was the foundation of everything. But trust cannot survive when it becomes one-sided. Trust cannot breathe when it is forced to sit in the dark. Trust cannot thrive when it is used as a shield to hide the truth. And deep down I knew that. I knew something was off. I knew something was shifting beneath the surface. I felt it in my stomach. I felt it in the heavy silence that stretched between us. I felt it in the little ways he pulled back without ever admitting he was pulling away. There were days when he would avoid eye contact as he spoke. Days when he would touch his phone with a nervousness he did not show before. Days when he would get defensive over the simplest questions. If I asked what time he would be home, he would sigh like I was interrogating him. If I asked who he had been with, he would act offended as though trust itself was an insult. Meanwhile, I was the one trying to hold everything together. I was the one trying to keep harmony. I was the one shrinking myself just to avoid conflict. I kept telling myself that all couples go through rough patches. That people change. That stress can make anyone act different. But the truth is that I was ignoring patterns. I was ignoring instincts. I was ignoring myself. I thought that being a good partner meant giving endless understanding even when that understanding made me blind. I thought that love required accepting uncertainty even when that uncertainty began to drain my spirit. I thought that patience would eventually bring him back to me. But patience cannot repair what someone else is actively breaking. I began to notice the smallest details. The way he kept his phone face down on the table. The sudden need to take his phone with him everywhere, even into rooms where he used to leave it behind without worry. The new passwords I never saw before. The messages he deleted. The notifications he cleared before I could see them. I saw all of it. But I pretended not to. Because acknowledging it meant accepting that something precious was slipping from my hands. Accepting it meant confronting a reality that frightened me deeply. There were moments when he would come home smelling like a perfume that did not belong to me. Moments when he would laugh at a message he refused to show me. Moments when he would say he needed space yet never explain what kind of space or why. I tried to rationalize every sign. I tried to push away the fear that rose in my chest. I tried to keep my heart softened because I did not want to lose him. I did not want to admit that maybe I had already lost him long before the stranger ever approached me. I blamed myself for everything. I told myself I was overthinking. I told myself I was too sensitive. I told myself I was imagining things that did not exist. I stayed quiet to keep the peace. I held my breath through every doubt. I swallowed every question that might upset him. I even doubted my own intuition because loving someone can twist reality into something softer, something blurred, something dangerously forgiving. I remember one evening when we sat at the table eating dinner in silence. He kept glancing at the clock. He kept tapping his foot. His mind was somewhere else entirely. I asked if everything was all right. He said he was fine, yet his voice did not match his expression. It felt strained and distant. When I reached for his hand, he pulled away with an excuse about needing to check something. That moment broke something inside me, yet I pretended it did not. I pretended to smile. I pretended nothing was wrong. I pretended to be strong enough to ignore the truth that was slowly suffocating me. The worst part was how easy it became for him to dismiss my feelings. If I expressed concern, he acted like I was being dramatic. If I asked a simple question he made me feel guilty for even caring. If I looked hurt he would roll his eyes or sigh or change the subject. Slowly I learned to stay quiet. Slowly I learned to silence my own heart. Slowly I became someone who no longer recognized herself. I had created a version of myself that existed only to maintain the illusion of peace. My friends would tell me that something felt off. They would say he no longer seemed connected. They would say my smile looked different. But I brushed it all away because admitting even a small truth meant risking the entire foundation of my life. And I was not ready. I was not ready to face the possibility that the man I trusted could be hiding a different life. I was not ready to rebuild myself. I was not ready to lose the comfort of the familiar even if that comfort had become painful. I kept making excuses for him. If he forgot something important I told myself he was stressed. If he snapped at me I told myself he was overwhelmed. If he grew distant I told myself he just needed time. I justified everything until nothing made sense anymore. I gave him the benefit of the doubt long after he stopped earning it. I offered grace long after he stopped appreciating it. And I stayed loyal long after he stopped deserving loyalty. Looking back I realize how much I talked myself out of the truth. I convinced myself that love meant endurance in all things. That love meant silence when my heart hurt. That love meant sacrificing my peace so he could keep his. But real love does not require you to shrink. Real love does not force you to ignore your instincts. Real love does not make you doubt your own worth. The truth was always there waiting for me. It showed itself in the quiet moments. The uneasy pauses. The change in tone. The late nights. The guarded phone. The forced smile. The emotional distance. The emptiness of his presence. All the signs were forming a picture I refused to see. I ignored the truth because confronting it meant confronting the possibility of heartbreak. And sometimes heartbreak feels more terrifying than deceit. Sometimes we hold on to illusions because they feel safer than reality. Sometimes we cling to the version of a person we created because the real version is too painful to accept. But ignoring cracks does not stop them from widening. Ignoring signs does not erase them. Ignoring the truth does not protect you. It only delays the moment when the truth finally arrives full force, refusing to be denied any longer. And that is where I found myself when the stranger approached me. Face to face with the truth I had been avoiding. Face to face with the reality that every crack, every sign, every uneasy moment had been pointing to something I refused to confront. It was not her words that broke me. It was realizing she confirmed what my heart had known all along. The truth did not arrive gently in my life. It did not knock softly or wait politely for permission. It came crashing into my world like a storm that had been gathering for far too long. When I confronted him that night my voice was shaking and my heart felt like it was trying to break free from my chest. I kept replaying the stranger's words in my head, her trembling tone, her fearful eyes, and the weight she carried in silence for so long. I needed answers. I needed clarity. I needed truth even though I felt the dread rising in me like a wave I could not outrun. I approached him when he walked through the door, and even before I spoke he already looked uneasy. His shoulders were tight, his expression strained, and there was a heaviness in the air that felt unnatural. I told him that someone had approached me and said he made a huge mistake. I expected him to deny it quickly and firmly. I expected anger or outrage or disbelief. But instead he froze. He did not say anything. He did not blink. He did not defend himself. The silence that followed was louder than any confession. In that moment everything inside me cracked. Silence can reveal more truth than words sometimes. His silence told me that everything I feared was real. His silence told me that the stranger was not confused or misinformed. His silence told me that he had been hiding something so big that even he did not know how to speak it aloud. I watched his face lose its color and his eyes fall to the floor like a child caught in the middle of a lie he never expected to be exposed. It was the first time I saw fear on his face, not fear for me but fear for himself. I asked him again, trying to push the words through my dry throat. I needed to hear something. I needed to know the truth even if it burned. He finally opened his mouth but nothing meaningful came out. Just fragments. Just half sounds. Just empty attempts to create excuses that even he did not believe. He kept looking away from me, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as if he could escape the moment by simply refusing to acknowledge it. But all his movements only confirmed what I already knew. He was guilty. He had been hiding something from me. And he had no idea how to explain it or how to fix the damage. I felt something heavy settle in my stomach as I stood there watching the man I loved fall apart without saying a single real word. I always imagined that if betrayal ever found its way into my life it would come with shouting or tears or dramatic chaos. I never expected it to appear in this quiet suffocating stillness. I never expected betrayal to look like a man avoiding my eyes because he did not want me to see the truth reflected in them. I never expected the breaking of my heart to feel so eerily calm. I asked him why. That simple question echoed through the room like a plea, a cry, a final attempt to understand how everything had gone so wrong. He ran his hands over his face in frustration, but he still did not answer. He kept whispering that things were complicated, that he did not mean for anything to happen, that he was sorry even though his tone did not hold the full weight of regret. Every word he spoke felt like an attempt to protect himself, not me. It felt like he was trying to manage the situation instead of owning his actions. And that hurt more than anything else. I felt myself slowly detach from him as if my heart was stepping backward one step at a time, trying to protect what little strength I still had left. I looked at him and saw not the man I trusted but a stranger who wore his face. A stranger who had built a life next to me while hiding another truth behind my back. A stranger who had allowed me to love him wholeheartedly while he gave only pieces of himself. A stranger who had practiced deception so long that honesty seemed foreign to him. My voice trembled as I asked him if he truly believed I would never find out. His eyes widened and for a second I saw the truth flicker across his face. He never thought the truth would reach me. He thought the stranger would stay silent. He thought his lies would hold. He thought the world would keep protecting him from the consequences of his actions. It was not just the mistake that broke me. It was the realization that he trusted the lie more than he trusted me. When he finally spoke again, he started explaining things in a scattered, disjointed way. He said he was under pressure. He said he was overwhelmed. He said he felt lost. He said he did not know how to talk to me anymore. None of it sounded honest. None of it sounded like accountability. It felt like he was trying to paint himself as a victim inside a story he had created. And I realized something important in that moment. Betrayal does not just come from the actions themselves. It comes from the excuses. It comes from the unwillingness to take responsibility. It comes from the lies people tell to protect their own comfort at the cost of someone else's peace. His voice grew softer as he spoke. Not gentle, not remorseful, just small, like someone who had run out of places to hide. I watched him shrink in front of me emotionally, mentally, and morally. I watched the image I had of him dissolve piece by piece. And with every passing second I felt myself getting stronger in a painful, almost unbearable way. Sometimes pain builds strength faster than love ever could. I asked him if he loved me. He hesitated. That hesitation shattered something deep inside me, because love is not something you hesitate about. Love does not require a pause. Love does not need a moment to think. Love is either present or absent, and his hesitation told me exactly where his heart had been drifting while I kept holding on. He eventually said he did love me, but the words felt hollow. They felt forced. They felt like a reflex, not a truth. He tried to step closer to me, but I took a step back. I needed distance. I needed space to breathe because the air around him felt heavy with lies and fear and confusion. He reached out his hand, but I could not touch him. My body refused. My heart refused. My spirit refused. There are moments in life when distance becomes the only form of protection you have left, and this was one of them. He kept asking me to listen to him. He kept saying things were not what they seemed. He kept promising explanations that never came. Yet everything he said felt like a half-truth or a broken truth or a twisted truth. I had spent so long trying to interpret his words that now I no longer wanted to interpret anything. I wanted clarity. I wanted honesty. I wanted a truth that stood tall without needing 1,000 excuses to hold it up. When he realized I was not falling apart the way he expected, his expression changed. He looked almost surprised, almost concerned, almost threatened. It was as if he had expected me to beg him to stay or to argue with him or to fight for him. But I did not. Something inside me had shifted the moment he chose silence over honesty. I felt a strange sense of detachment creeping in, a sense that the man I had built my life with had been fading away long before this night even arrived. I kept thinking about the stranger, about how much courage it must have taken for her to approach me, about how deeply the truth had affected her as well, about how she had nothing to gain by warning me. Meanwhile, the man I married had everything to lose and still chose deceit. That comparison alone revealed everything I needed to know about who he truly was. The room felt smaller with each passing second. The walls felt closer. The air felt thicker. It was not the space that changed. It was my perception. It was my heart recognizing that this chapter of my life was no longer safe. No longer honest. No longer healthy. I could not unhear the truth. I could not unknow what he had done. I could not go back to the woman I was before the stranger approached me. I stood there watching him try to gather words that refused to form. And I realized that I did not need to hear any more. I already had my answer. Not from his mouth but from his silence, his fear, his hesitation, and his inability to look me in the eye. The truth had spoken long before he attempted to explain anything. And once truth reveals itself, it cannot be buried again. That night everything shifted, not because of what he admitted but because of what he could not admit. Not because of the words he said but because of the ones he avoided. Not because he broke my heart but because I finally saw the truth without illusion, without denial, without excuses. And sometimes seeing the truth hurts. But sometimes seeing the truth saves you. The moment I stepped into that quiet part of my life, something shifted, and I still cannot tell if it was the world leaning in to whisper a warning or my own heart finally cracking open to let the truth spill out. Key point 4 is where everything I believed was a steady foundation began to move beneath my feet, and I saw with painful clarity that the story I thought I was living was not the one unfolding around me. It began on a morning that looked ordinary enough because the sky was soft and the light was gentle, and no one around me knew that the air carried a message I was not yet ready to hear. I walked through my home feeling the familiar pulse of routine, but inside my chest something restless tapped softly as if urging me to pay attention. It was like a small knock against a door I had kept tightly locked for far too long. I remember pausing in the hallway and looking at a picture on the wall. It was a photo of us, one of those staged moments where everything looks perfect and where the smile on my face shines like a woman who is sure her life is safe. Yet standing there I felt something entirely different. It felt like the layers of that smile were peeling back and revealing that I had been performing happiness instead of living it. I looked into the eyes of the man beside me in that photograph, and for the first time I saw distance. Not the kind you can measure but the kind that grows quietly in the gap between truth and pretense. I touched the frame and whispered to myself that maybe the stranger's warning had not been as wild as I wanted to believe. You know those moments when every detail in your house feels slightly off. When the air feels too still. When your heartbeat echoes too loudly. That was my entire morning. My coffee tasted wrong. My clothes felt unfamiliar against my skin. The silence in the kitchen felt heavy. The world was the same but I was not. I kept hearing the stranger's voice in my memory repeating that my husband had made a huge mistake. At first I thought it was ridiculous. Who listens to a stranger? Who lets a stranger plant doubt in their marriage? But doubt is tricky. It does not need truth to exist. It only needs a tiny crack. I walked outside needing air because my thoughts kept circling like wild birds. I tried to steady myself by convincing my mind that the stranger must have been confused. Mistaken identity, overly dramatic, anything but accurate. I told myself those things again and again until the repetition grew exhausting. When lies meet truth, they burn at the edges and create heat. I felt that heat in the center of my chest. I kept telling myself that my husband was loyal and trustworthy and steady. Yet every time I defended him inside my mind I felt something tighten, as if the words were not fitting as smoothly as they once had. I walked through the neighborhood with slow steps. Leaves shifted in the wind. Dogs barked distantly. People moved about their day with normal ease. I studied them like they held some secret I needed. How do people look when they are not hiding anything? How do they breathe? How do they hold their posture? Did anyone else around me ever look at their partner and wonder who they really were beneath the face they presented every day? I realized then that maybe I had not looked closely enough. Maybe I had loved him so much that I never questioned the silence between his answers or the way his eyes sometimes avoided mine when I asked a simple question. Love can blind you in the softest way. Not all at once but gently until you no longer see the shadows gathering at the edges. When I got back home, the stillness in the living room felt unsettling again. I sat on the couch and picked up my phone intending to distract myself, but instead my finger hovered over his name in my messages. I stared at it, feeling an odd sense of unfamiliarity. How strange that the person you share your life with can feel both known and unknown at the same time. I typed out a question. Something simple, something harmless. How's your day? I sat there watching the blinking cursor as if it could reveal the truth in his response before he even sent it. When his reply came, it was short. Too short. And though I could not explain why, something about it made me feel colder inside. That was the moment I realized I needed clarity. Real clarity. Not the soft soothing stories I told myself. Not the hope-tinted visions I clung to. I needed to know if the stranger had spoken truth or chaos. So I started paying attention with a sharper mind. I watched how he spoke to me when he got home. I noticed the way he stood in the doorway as if measuring the room before stepping in. I noticed the way his smile flickered like a light bulb that was no longer stable. He asked about my day, but his eyes drifted past me. He touched my shoulder lightly, but the warmth felt thin. A part of me wanted to hold him close and beg him to pour out the truth, but another part of me wanted to step back and observe quietly like an investigator studying a puzzle. Night came and he fell asleep quickly, but I lay awake staring at the ceiling, feeling each heartbeat reverberate in my chest. This was the moment I fully accepted that something real had changed. Whether the stranger was right or wrong, something in my marriage was not aligned. I could feel it like a thread pulled too tight, ready to snap. I turned my head and looked at him sleeping beside me. His breathing was steady, his expression calm, yet I could not shake the feeling that he was drifting farther from me each day. I wondered if he could sense my doubt. I wondered if he felt any guilt. I wondered what truth he carried behind that peaceful sleeping face. The next morning I watched him get ready for work. He moved with practiced motions, buttoning his shirt, adjusting his belt, checking his watch. I studied the details, trying to uncover the man beneath the daily routine. Routine is safe. Routine hides things. I asked him gently if everything was all right. He paused only for a second, but that 1 second spoke louder than any sentence he could have given me. He said he was fine. He said everything was normal. He smiled, but his eyes told me a different story. I felt that familiar tightening inside my chest again. His answer slid across the surface of the truth without touching it. Something inside me broke open then. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, irreversible way. I decided that I would not run from the truth. I would not let fear blind me. I would face whatever was hidden, no matter how painful the discovery might be. I watched him leave the house, and as the door shut behind him, the silence felt like a promise. A promise that I would uncover what lay beneath. A promise that I would no longer settle for half-truths or shadows. I spent the day gathering every small detail I could recall from the past weeks. The forgotten calls, the late nights, the sudden change in tone, the uneasy expression he tried to hide when he thought I was not looking. I replayed each moment in slow motion. I examined every word, every silence, every shift. It was like turning on a bright light in a room I had kept dim for too long. With each memory examined, I saw more clearly that something real was being concealed. Not a simple mistake, not a misunderstanding, something deeper. As the hours passed, I felt a strength rising within me. A strength I did not know I possessed. The kind of strength that comes when a woman finally stops running from what she feels. I told myself that truth is not an enemy. Truth is a guide. Truth is a doorway, and I would walk through it even if my knees shook. I stood in my kitchen staring at the window, and I whispered to myself that my heart had been whispering warnings long before the stranger ever spoke to me. By evening I felt resolute, calm, almost steady. I knew that the next step would change everything. Whether it confirmed my fear or proved the stranger wrong, I would finally know. And knowing is always better than living in confusion. So I waited for him to come home. Not with fear, not with anger, but with clarity, with readiness. And that is how key point 4 unfolded. The shift from doubt to determination. The moment I stopped being afraid of the truth and started demanding it. The moment I realized that the stranger may have been the spark but my own heart was the fire. The truth was calling me and I was finally ready to answer. Key point 5 is where the truth did not whisper anymore, it roared and I felt its heat move through every part of my life. This was the moment when the quiet suspicion that I had tried to bury under routine and hope finally rose to the surface with a force I could no longer ignore. It began when I decided that waiting for answers was no longer enough. I needed to step into the center of the truth instead of standing on the edge pretending I could not see its shape. So I followed the threads that had been pulling at my attention for days, and what I found changed everything I thought I knew about the man I had vowed to spend my life with. It started with something small. A detail so ordinary that I had overlooked it for months. His second phone. The one he said he used for work emergencies. At first I believed him because trust can make fiction feel like fact. But now that my heart had shifted into a stance of clarity, I saw the truth hiding behind that explanation. He guarded that phone like a shield. He kept it face down. He kept it turned off when he was home. He carried it with him even to the bathroom. Each of those things felt like tiny sparks in the dark, and together they lit a fire that pushed me toward the truth. He had left it at home by accident. It was sitting on the counter next to his wallet as if placed there by fate itself. I stared at it, feeling both fear and purpose rise inside me. My hands trembled though my spirit stood still. I knew that touching it would change my life. I knew that there were truths inside it that were not meant for me but were meant to be revealed. I lifted it slowly and felt its weight settle into my palm. It felt heavier than a phone should feel. It felt like it carried the weight of everything he had hidden from me. For a long moment I simply held it to my chest and breathed deeply. The air felt thick as if the house itself understood that a shift was unfolding. I whispered a prayer, not for comfort but for strength. Strength to face whatever I found. Strength to remain steady even if the truth shattered the image I still held of him in my heart. When I finally turned it on, the screen lit up with a bright glow that made my pulse jump. The password prompt appeared and for a second I thought the truth would remain locked away. But then I remembered the strange birthday he once mentioned, a birthday that did not belong to him or to me. I entered the numbers and the phone opened with a soft click. That click echoed through my soul like a door swinging open. Inside the phone were messages, pictures and calls that did not belong to the man I knew. The names were unfamiliar. The conversations were secretive. The tone was different, more guarded, more intense, as if he carried a separate life in his hands. I scrolled through each detail, feeling my heart tighten and soften all at once. The truth was complicated and messy. He had connections to people he never mentioned. He had conversations he never explained. He had responsibilities that did not match the story he lived with me. I found messages with someone who spoke to him in a tone filled with both fear and respect. The words hinted at danger, at mistakes, at debts he owed. This was not a simple affair. This was not a small betrayal. This was a world he walked in that he had hidden from me for years. A world filled with shadows and secrets and consequences. My breath grew unsteady as I read the message that said he had made a mistake and that people were looking for him. It reminded me of the stranger's warning. Suddenly that stranger's urgency made sense. He was not a meddler. He was a messenger of a truth bigger than my marriage. My knees weakened and I sat on the kitchen floor, clutching the phone and pressing my palm against my forehead as if trying to keep my thoughts from scattering. I felt my heart breaking, but not from betrayal in the way I expected. This was not about infidelity. This was about danger. This was about a man living two lives. The husband I knew was soft and predictable, but the man in these messages was someone who navigated spaces filled with tension and risk. It was like discovering that your spouse had been a stranger standing in your own home, wearing the face of familiarity while carrying the burdens of a life you never touched. I wanted to cry, but the tears did not fall. Instead I felt something else rise within me. A strange, powerful steadiness. The kind of power a woman feels when the veil lifts and she finally sees the whole picture instead of the pieces. I stood up slowly and gathered my breath. I walked to the window and stared outside at the world that still moved peacefully, unaware of the storm unfolding inside my chest. I whispered to myself that knowing the truth is always better than being protected by lies. Even painful truth is a kind of freedom. I took the phone and sat at the table reading deeper. I found voice messages from a man whose tone carried fear and anger. He said things about a deal gone wrong, about someone being betrayed, about consequences that were coming. My hands grew cold as I realized that my husband was entangled in something dangerous. Something that could reach our home. Something that could break more than just trust. I leaned back and closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it all settle into my bones. I remembered every moment he had acted strange. The nights he returned home with tension written across his face. The times he avoided certain calls. The sudden excuses. The unexpected mood shifts. It all made sense now. He was not simply distant. He was hiding a part of himself he believed would destroy us if it touched our lives. But in hiding it he had created the destruction he feared. The truth hit me with a force that felt both grounding and devastating. My husband had not betrayed me in the way I suspected. He had betrayed himself. He had become someone he never intended to be. He had stepped into something that had wrapped around his life like a silent trap. And now it was closing in. I sat there breathing through the storm inside me until I realized that I needed more than answers. I needed understanding. I needed to know who he really was beyond the mask he wore for me. I needed to understand how a man could live two lives and still come home every night and kiss me like everything was fine. I needed to understand the depth of his fear, the depth of his secrecy, and the depth of the mistake that stranger had spoken about. When he returned home that evening I looked at him differently. Not with accusation but with clarity. He walked through the door carrying the weight of a long day, unaware that I had already stepped into the truth he had tried to hide. I studied the lines on his face. The tiredness in his eyes. The tension in his shoulders. Suddenly he did not look like my husband anymore. He looked like a man who had been running from something for too long. He greeted me with his usual gentle tone, but I felt the separation between his voice and his spirit. He sensed something in my eyes because he paused as if waiting for a question. I did not ask it yet. Instead I watched him move around the house trying to hide his unrest. I could see it clearly now. The way he avoided looking at his forgotten phone. The way he spoke in short sentences. The way he checked the locks twice. The way he kept glancing at the window as if expecting someone to appear. It was only then I understood the full truth. My husband was not simply living a double life. He was trying to protect me from the consequences of that life. The mistake he had made was not about another woman. It was about something far more dangerous. His fear was not of losing me. It was of pulling me into the darkness he had stepped into on his own. I watched him standing there burdened by secrets he carried alone, and something inside me broke in a different way. It was not the shattering of a heart betrayed. It was the shattering of an illusion. I had loved the man in front of me without knowing the world he lived in. Now that world was unfolding before me and I knew I could not go back to ignorance. This was the turning point. The moment the truth became undeniable. The moment I realized that love and fear and deception had tangled themselves around my marriage in a way that would require a painful unraveling. And as I stood there looking at him with the full knowledge of who he truly was, I knew that the next step would shake us both. This was key point 5. The revelation of the life he hid. The truth behind the stranger's warning. The moment when everything became clear and nothing would ever be the same. Key point 6 is where everything came to a head, where the truth could no longer hide in the shadows of our home, and where the man I thought I knew finally stood in front of me with nothing left to shield him. This was the collision between who he pretended to be and who he really was, and the moment I had to decide whether to hold on or let go. It did not begin with a dramatic confrontation. It began with a silence so deep it felt like the entire world had paused to watch what would unfold between us. That night I waited until he finally settled on the far side of the couch. He looked exhausted in a way I had not noticed before now that I knew what he carried. His eyes were heavy and his shoulders slumped and his breath sounded uneven, as if even the simple act of existing had become a burden. I watched him quietly and he knew it. He felt the weight of my gaze and something inside him shifted. He looked at me not with defensiveness but with resignation. As if he finally accepted that his truths could not remain buried. I held his forgotten phone in my hands. I did not hide it. I placed it gently on the table between us like a symbol of everything we had avoided. When he saw it, his face changed. Not with anger, not with shock, but with the expression of a man who has been running for so long that he has no strength left to flee. He lowered his head and breathed slowly as if preparing himself to walk through the fire of revelation. I did not speak yet. I wanted him to say it. I wanted him to step into the truth on his own. He lifted his eyes with a heaviness that pierced me deeper than any betrayal could. In that moment I realized that the man I had loved was not a villain. He was a man choking under the weight of his own mistakes. His voice cracked when he finally asked if I had opened the phone. I nodded once, a small simple motion that carried the force of 1,000 unspoken questions. He closed his eyes and let out a long breath, a breath that sounded like surrender. When he began to speak, his words were slow and fragile. He told me that years ago, before we married, before he settled into the life we built, he became involved in something that he thought he could walk away from. He thought it was temporary. He thought it would end cleanly. He thought he could cut ties and rebuild his life without consequence. But the world he stepped into did not release people easily. He told me he tried to fix something for someone he cared about at the time, and one wrong decision rippled into a chain of events he could not reverse. His mistake was not cheating or falling out of love with me. His mistake was believing he could outrun the consequences of a past he never told me about. His mistake was thinking that hiding the truth kept me safe. His mistake was not trusting me with the heaviness of his history. He never meant to bring danger into our home, but it had followed him silently like a shadow he could not shake. The stranger who approached me was connected to that shadow. A man from his past who believed that my husband owed something that could no longer be ignored. As he spoke, I watched the layers peel away. I did not see the confident, calm man he presented to the world. I saw a person who had been carrying fear alone for far too long. He confessed that every phone call, every late night, every sudden change in behavior was tied to the pressure that had begun closing in on him again. He had tried to fix things behind the scenes. He had tried to handle it without pulling me into the storm. But secrets have a way of breaking through even the strongest walls. He told me he never meant for me to find the second phone. He said he kept it only to prevent those people from contacting me. He believed that if he took all the communication himself, he could shield me. But shielding someone with lies is not protection. It is suffocation, and he knew that now. He said he was terrified that the truth would destroy our marriage, but now he saw that the lies were doing more damage than the truth ever could. I listened to him without interrupting because I needed to hear everything. I needed him to pour out the truth completely. No pieces, no half answers, no shadows. He spoke for a long time, explaining how deep the mistake went, how far it stretched, and how many years it had haunted him. He said he thought he had escaped it when he married me. He believed love would erase his past. But a past denied does not vanish. It waits. When he finally fell silent, the room felt heavy yet strangely pure. The truth stood between us, raw and bare. I felt an ache in my chest, not from betrayal but from the pain of seeing the man I loved drowning in a secret that was never meant to be carried alone. I realized that this was bigger than trust or deceit. This was about survival, fear, and humanity. He was flawed. He was scared. He was vulnerable. But he was finally honest. I needed air, so I stood and walked toward the window. The night sky looked endless and dark, like the uncertainty stretching ahead of us. He followed me with his eyes but did not move. He knew I needed space to absorb everything. My breath shook. My mind raced. My heart shifted between compassion and hurt, between understanding and fear. I asked him quietly why he had not told me earlier. Why he had not trusted me with the truth. His answer was simple yet heartbreaking. He said he could not bear the thought of seeing fear in my eyes because of him. That was the moment something softened in me. Not forgiveness. Not acceptance. Just softness. A human softness that blooms when you realize that the person in front of you is not a monster but a deeply flawed soul who made a desperate decision and spent years paying for it in silence. I returned to the couch and he leaned forward, gripping his hands tightly as if waiting for me to shatter or scream or walk away. But I did none of those things. Instead, I asked what he planned to do now. How he intended to break free from this shadow once and for all. His answer was honest. He said he did not know. He said he was tired of running but terrified of facing the people he had tangled with. He said he needed help. He said he needed strength. He said he needed me. Not to fix it for him but to stand beside him as he faced what he had avoided. That was the first time I saw him truly vulnerable, open, human. A part of me wanted to turn away to protect myself from the storm he carried. Another part of me wanted to step closer to stand with him, not because he deserved it but because sometimes love is not about perfection. Sometimes love is about seeing the wounds of another person and choosing not to abandon them in their darkest hour. I took a long breath and looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a long time I saw the truth of who he was. A complex man. A man who made mistakes. A man capable of hurting and protecting at the same time. A man who needed to face his past so he could build a future with me or without me. I told him that if he wanted my support he had to give me absolute transparency moving forward. No more secrets. No more walls. No more hidden phones. No more stories crafted to shield me. I said if we were going to walk through this fire together he had to trust me with all of it, even the parts that scared him. He agreed with a sincerity I could feel deep inside my bones. The night grew quiet again, but the heaviness between us shifted. It was no longer a weight of lies. It was the weight of truth, and truth, even when painful, has a strange way of clearing the air. I realized then that this moment, this key point, was not about the mistake itself. It was about the revelation of who he truly was beneath the layers he had built over the years. It was about my own strength in choosing how to move forward. It was about the power that rises when truth finally steps into the light. That night did not end with a clean resolution. It ended with honesty, tension, vulnerability, and a fragile but real sense of beginning. The beginning of unraveling the past. The beginning of rebuilding trust. The beginning of stepping into truth even if our steps were unsteady. And that is key point 6. The moment truth stood naked. The moment the past could no longer hide. The moment I saw who he really was and had to decide whether the truth would break us or set us free.